Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S6 6100, Gazing at Stars, Stories from Asia, retold by Claire West. Chapter 1, Taken for a Ride. In China, as in every country, traditions change over the years. In an old wedding ceremony, the married couple were carried in a sedan chair to the sound of a trumpet playing and songs about love and harmony and good fortune. Jinan runs his own wedding chair business for couples who like the old customs, but his heart is heavy as he sings the familiar songs, remembering his own wife, Lily. In this fortunate hour of extreme happiness, the newly married are seated. Jinan sang out in a loud but beautifully accented voice. This was his first day back at work after his wife Lily had left him, and he was glad that he was managing to sound calm, even joyful for the occasion. He was surprised by the reflection of his wide smile in the shining surnai trumpet as he raised it to his mouth and blew a short, sharp burst on it. At this signal, the four sedan carriers, all dressed in soft blue silk, their cheeks painted red, picked up the poles at the four corners, lifted the chair onto their shoulders, and waited for Jinan's orders. Let the journey begin, Jinan called, and blew once more on the surnay a lively, joyous note. The late morning sun beat down on the procession, on the sedan covered with red silk and flowers, and on the four carriers, whose cheeks grew redder as they walked. The bodies rocked from side to side as they balanced the weight of the couple in the sedan. Jinan led the procession, his waist moving this way and that as he blew the trumpet. In spite of his heavy heart, his body could not resist the music he had known since childhood. As he wiped the sweat from his face, he saw through the thin curtain at the sedan window the bride's gloved hands, covering her face as her shoulders moved up and down. It was an odd thing to do. The woman had been veiled when she got into the sedan, and now Jinan could not tell if she was laughing or crying. He looked in at the couple more closely, but the bride continued to bury her face in her hands, as if she had something to hide. These days, the ride in the sedan chair was no longer considered a necessary part of a wedding. Young people now just saw it as a pleasant way of reminding them of the traditions of the old days. Over the years, Jinan had witnessed many emotions in the couples who had taken the ride: delight, contentment, confusion, wonders. But somehow he found this particular couple disturbing. To start with, there was hardly any sound coming from inside the sedan, and when something was heard, it was always the groom speaking. In his heavy, sudden accent, the bride gave soft, short answers. Had they had an argument on this of all days? Despite his own misery, Jinan still wanted his customers to be happy. The procession passed through a narrow street lined with restaurants and cafes. Next to the bright new Seafood Haven restaurant lay a large area of new building, where most of the construction workers were too busy to look at the passing sedan. Only one man paused to look down, and for a moment Jinan seemed to catch sight of his former self. Not so long ago, he had been a construction worker, just like those men, one of the city's low-paid slaves. He was lucky to have got out of it after a couple of years. The sedan ride was one of the many wedding traditions that were becoming fashionable again, and that meant he could find a job as a Sonai trumpeter. Soon afterwards, he was able to start his own wedding sedan service, employing 4 friends from his village to help him. The job suited him well, blowing his trumpet, dancing along with the eyes of the crowd on him. He felt he was where he belonged. The carriers were walking faster now. They had become used to the wait and knew they were over halfway to their destination. Like jewels that connect and jade that matches, may your married life be harmonious, Jinan sang. His men joined in with their deep voices. Life is sweet. 2 birds that fly side by side. 2 flowers that grow on the same plant. Suddenly Jinan was full of sadness, remembering the way these same words had moved Lily. When he first met her, she was selling clothes in a market. She had seen him giving his performance and had fallen in love with him. I could tell you meant everything you said, she said. City boys were not sincere, she had told him. They wanted fun, not marriage. She was looking for someone who would stay with her forever, someone she could grow white hair with. It was she who had encouraged him to start his own wedding chair business. Jinan shook his body more widely, as if to throw off the memory of Lily. Losing himself in the performance, he raised a shennai with his right hand and blew it as hard as he could. He didn't even know the name of the tune he was playing. It was simply something his grandfather and his own father had played for years at villagers' weddings in the countryside. They had arrived at the bridge where a large crowd had gathered to watch what they knew would be highlight of the procession. He put the trumpet down and took a deep breath. Then he turned to face the sedan. In peace and harmony, he said, a ride to the pleasure of love. She the instrument and he the player. Music and harmony, repeated the man. At his command, the 4 carriers started to move the sedan playfully up and down. The singing grew faster and more breathless. The crowd came closer, expecting to hear the sedan's screams of the bride, pretending to be frightened, and the deep voice of the groom, calming her down. As Jinan danced for his audience's amusement, he deliberately moved away from the sedan. The couple's cries of joy and pleasure would have brought back unbearable memories of being in the sedan with Lily. The day on their own wedding ride, Lily, who sat with her body tightly against his, had worn a traditional red wedding dress, and her smiling face had looked like the most beautiful flower he had ever seen. But this time the crowd were disappointed. However hard they tried, they could hear no sound from inside the sedan. Jinan approached the chair again, and through each curtain he saw, written inside in red, double happiness, a special celebratory word for weddings. The bride's head was still bent low, as if in deep thought, half covered by her hands. Why was she not looking at her husband? Were they still arguing? Jinan turned to face the crowd and went on with his speech. Be a dutiful son and daughter. May you produce a fat little boy or a girl, and may your family do well. He would have liked a child, a little girl, perhaps, but Lily had insisted that she didn't want a baby. A child would have changed their lives too much. She didn't want the responsibility. Loving her dearly, he accepted her wishes. It helped that his parents were no longer alive, so they were not around to complain of the lack of grandchildren. Jinan's and Lily's days were their own, and they were long. But as time went on, she began to find fault with him. The way he snored, the way he spat, the way he slept without washing his feet. He was hurt. when she called him a peasant. However, no matter how hard things were, she loved to hear the words he sang so beautifully for the wedding rite. He had found her delight embarrassing. These were public words, part of a ceremony. He did care for her with all his heart, but these words had nothing to do with Lily and him. But today he saw that he had been wrong. He now realized that all along he had indeed been singing about the two of them. All his feelings for her, all the hopes he once had for them were expressed in these words of love and passion. He put on a brave face, less for himself than for the carrier. Who needed to be paid. The wind blows softly, the sun shines warmly, he sang. With so much good fortune and so much joy, we wish you luck and hope that you will grow your white hair together. Hey, hey, the sedan carriers shouted together. The crowd gathered once again to watch the final part of the event. Sedan down, Jinan's trembling voice rang out thinly. The right hand that had been holding the trumpet felt heavy and sore. This would be his last sedan job, he decided. He would rather go back to poorly paid and exhausting building work than suffer this pain. The front of the sedan opened and the thin, sudden-looking groom got out and stretched. Then he turned as if remembering something, just as the bride stepped down. So it was her, Jinan saw as their eyes met. Although her eyes had tears in them and her face seemed fixed and strangely unlined, he had heard about the operation that was available nowadays to stretch the skin and make people look younger. Lily had even mentioned it. Now she did look younger, but old at the same time. He thought she was going to fall and stepped towards her. The sudden man caught her and laughed. Well, that was fun. What shall we try next? I've heard the boat trip is good. She remembered in his arms and murmured something. He nodded and reached into his pocket. How much do I owe you? He asked Jinan, slightly impatiently. Jinan stood there without moving. No words came out of his mouth. One of the carriers spoke for him. 550 yuan, he said. Here, take 600. The sudden man pushed the money into Jinan's hands and smiled. The extra is for your flowery words. You have a clever pair of lips. Jinan's hand trembled and the money fell on the ground. One of the sedan men bent down and picked the notes up, hesitated and handed them back to Jinan. The sudden man wrapped his arm around Lily and led the way toward the bridge. Wait. Suddenly Jinan's voice rang out. You are supposed to put the money in a red wedding handkerchief. What are you talking about? It's the tradition. Oh, come on, I gave you a tip. That's not the point. You said in a wedding sedan, so you pay me money wrapped in a red handkerchief. You're being silly. In a red handkerchief. But we are not getting married. You are? What? Jinan stared at Lily's pink wedding dress and all at the traditional objects whose names sounded like Oliver Sabason, which he and his men had carefully placed in the sedan for the occasion. He rented the clothes at the bright light center. Lily's voice floated to him in a low whisper. My boyfriend just wanted to have fun. Chapter 2, The First Party, the Atiya Hussein. In India, in the old days, a young, unmarried woman would live in her parents' home carefully, hidden away from the eyes of the world until the time came for her to marry. If she went outside the house, her clothes would hide her body from the eyes of men that desired. But times change, customers change, custom change, and people change. The first party is usually an enjoyable, exciting occasion, but not for this young wife. After the darkness of the veranda, the confusing brightness of the room made the doorstep almost invisible. She nearly fell over it. Nervousness was getting close to terror, and she wished she could return to the friendly darkness, but her husband was already pushing her gently into the room. My wife, he said in English, and the sound of the foreign words softened the awareness of this new relationship. The tall, smiling woman came towards them with outstretched hands, and the wife put her own weakly into the other's firm hold. "How'd you do?" said the woman. "How'd you do?" said the fat man beside her. "I'm very well, thank you," she said in the low voice of an uncertain child repeating a lesson. A shy glance avoided their eyes. They turned to her husband, and she stood there in the warm current of their easy friendliness, coldly conscious of herself. "I hope we are not too early," her husband said. "Of course not. The others are late. Do sit down." She sat on the edge of the big chair, her shoulders bent, nervously pulling her sari over her head. "What will you drink?" the fat man asked her. "Nothing, thank you." "Cigarette?" "No, thank you." She was sure that her husband and the tall woman were talking about her. She could feel needles of discomfort, and she smiled to hide them. The tall woman held a wine glass in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She wondered how it felt to hold a cigarette with such self-confidence. The woman had long nails, the pointed and bright red. She looked at her own, unpainted, cut carefully short, wondering how anyone could eat, work, wash with these claws tipped with blood. She drew her sari over her hands, covering her rings and bracelet, noticing the other's bare wrist like a widow's. "Shy little things, isn't she? But charming," said the woman, as if claiming a frightened child. "She'll get over it. Give me time." Her husband laughed. The wife heard him and blushed. When other guests came in, she did not know whether she should stand up as they were being introduced. But her husband came and stood beside her, putting his hand on her shoulder, so she knew she must remain sitting. She was glad when they forgot her for their drinks. The cigarette, the talk and laughter, she drew back into her chair, lonely in her strangeness, but hating the thought of anyone approaching her. She felt curious eyes on her, and this made her even more uncomfortable. When anyone came and sat by her, she smiled in cold defense, and her awkward answers soon cut short any conversation. She found people's talk difficult to follow, with their references to experience she had not had. Even the woman's conversation about dress and appearance seemed unfamiliar to her. She could not understand their interest in bodies, which she thought should be covered. When she saw how simply they were dressed, she wished she had not put on her bright, rich clothes and her heavy jewelry. She had done so because it was the custom to dress like that. But here no one seemed to care for customs or even know them. Her discomfort changed to anger, and she stared at the strange creatures around her. But her quick eyes slipped shyly away if they met someone else's. Her husband came at intervals that grew longer, with a few cheerful words, or a friend to whom he proudly presented, "My wife." She noticed the never empty glass in his hand, and the smell of his breath, and from anxiety and shock she turned to disgust and anger. It was wicked to drink, the religion forbade it, and she could not forgive him. She could not make herself smile anymore, but no one noticed, and their unconcern made her angrier. She was tired of the continual "Will you have a drink? What will you drink?" "Sure, you won't drink." It seemed they objected to her not drinking, or she objected to them drinking. She found this confusing. She asked for a glass of orange juice and used it as protection, putting it to her lips when anyone came near. They were eating now, helping themselves from the table by the wall. She did not want to leave her chair and wondered if it was wrong and they would notice she was not eating. A girl came towards her. offering her a plate of food. She sat up stiffly and took the plate with a smile. To help yourself, the girl said, the bending forward. As her light sari slipped from her shoulder, each high breast was visible beneath her tight red silk blouse. The wife pulled her own sari closer round her, blushing. The girl, unaware, said, "Try this sandwich and the olives are good." She had never seen an olive before but did not want to admit it. And when she put it in her mouth, she wanted to spit it out. When no one was looking, she slipped it under her chair, then felt sure someone had seen her and would find it. The room closed in on her with its noise and smoke. There was now the added loudness of music from the radiogram. She watched, fascinated, the movement of the machine as it changed records, but she hated the ugly sounds it threw at her. A girl walked up to it and started singing, moving her body along with the music. Her bare skin showed through the thin material she was wearing. She felt angry again. These were disgusting, shameless, good-for-nothing girls. So free with men. Their clothes drawing attention to their bodies instead of hiding. With their painted false mouth and their short hair that looked like a mad woman's, she fed her bitterness with every possible fault her mind could think of. These women were evil and wicked. They were trying to copy the foreigner for whom she felt no hatred. Because she expected nothing better from them, she wanted to break those records, the noise which they called music. A few couples began to dance. When they had rolled aside the carpet, she felt a sick horror at the way the men held the women, at the closeness of their bodies, at their coarsely suggestive movement. That surely was the extreme limit of what was possible in the presence of others. Her mother had nearly died in childbirth and had not cried out in case the man outside might hear, and she, her child, had to see this show up. Her offended modesty stopped her completing the thought. This was an attack on the basic rules which shaped her beliefs and which controlled her life. Protection against man's desire had always been necessary, not against touch alone, but also sound and sight. A man came and asked her to dance, and she withdrew into a chair in horror, shaking her head. Her husband saw her and called out as he danced, "Come on, don't be shy, you will soon learn." She felt the flame of anger. And she looked at him and kept on shaking her head until the man left her. Surprised by the violence of her refusal, she saw him dancing with another girl and knew they must be talking about her because they looked towards her and smiled. She was trembling with the complicated feelings of anger, hatred, jealousy, and confusion when her husband walked up to her and pulled her lovingly by the hand. "Get up, I'll teach you myself." She held tight to the chair and she struggled, and the violence of her reply, "Leave me alone," made him drop her hand. With a shocked surprise as the laughter left his face, she noticed his quick, embarrassed glance round the room, then the hard anger of his eyes as he left her without a word. He laughed more loudly when he joined the others. To drown that moment's silence, but it wrapped its miserable emptiness around her. She had been so sure of herself in her anger, dismissing these people as wrong. She was confident that her beliefs were right because they were held by her parents and grandparents and were centuries old. When she had seen them being attacked in her mind, they remained safe from destruction. Now she saw that her husband was one of the destroyers, and despite this, she knew that her life must forever be part of his. It was the most important belief of all. In conclusion and despair, she was surrounded by ruin. She wished desperately for the safety of the world home from which her marriage had promised, and an adventurous escape. There, each strict rule became a guiding stone, marking a safe path through unknown dangers. The tall woman came and sat beside her and put a hand kindly on her head. Tired child, the sympathy in her voice, eyes was unbearable. She got up and ran to the veranda, put her head against a wooden post, and wet it with her tears. The end.